In today's episode, we uncover 5 disturbing animal attacks in Yellowstone Park. From a dangerous curiosity, when a tourist tried to pet a grizzly cub, to a careless hiker who confronted a grizzly feeding on his backpack. First, we start with a woman who stepped off the trail for a selfie and walked straight toward a grizzly bear. It was the 6th of July, 2016, and the trail along Yellowstone's northern range cut through open sagebrush and scattered timber wide enough for 2 people to walk abreast and exposed enough that the views carried for miles in every direction. A weathered sign at the trailhead advised visitors to maintain a minimum of 100 yards from bears and wolves. Most visitors read it on the way in and continued down the trail. Nadine Okafor, 39, was a paralegal from Chicago who had finalized her divorce 3 weeks earlier. 2 friends had invited her to join a women's hiking group for the weekend, a small trip organized around several popular trails in Yellowstone National Park. She had arrived in the park the previous evening, and this was her first time hiking along the northern range. The group moved steadily along the open trail that morning, spaced in pairs and small clusters. The landscape was wide and quiet, with low sagebrush spreading across the slopes and scattered stands of timber breaking up the terrain. Nadine walked near the rear portion of the group with her phone in hand as they followed the trail's gradual curve through the open country. Grizzly bears are present throughout Yellowstone's northern range and are among the most dangerous large mammals in North America. Adult females typically weigh between 250 and 350 pounds and can cover ground at speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour in short bursts. They are highly protective of personal space and react with explosive force when approached too closely, particularly females with cubs nearby. Unlike black bears, grizzlies involved in defensive encounters rarely disengage immediately. The injuries they inflict during those brief encounters are often severe. Park guidelines set the minimum safe viewing distance at 100 yards. A grizzly can close that distance before most people have time to react. The group had rounded a bend in the trail when the leader raised a hand and stopped everyone. A large female grizzly bear was visible in the sagebrush, roughly 70 yards off the trail, moving slowly through the brush with her nose low to the ground while foraging. The leader instructed the group to hold position and allow the animal to continue moving without disturbance. Then she decided to take a selfie and wanted a clearer angle. She moved laterally through the low sagebrush, closing the distance incrementally, focused entirely on her frame. By the time she stopped, she was within 30 yards, moving through brush that had been masking her scent and muffling her footsteps until it no longer was. Someone in the group called her name sharply. She didn't turn around. The bear's head lifted abruptly. Its ears shifted forward and its posture stiffened. The animal released a sharp huff and popped its jaw, a warning behavior commonly observed in defensive encounters. Nadine remained within 30 yards of the animal, while still partially concealed in the brush. The bear charged immediately, accelerating in a straight line through the sagebrush. The distance was covered in under 3 seconds. Nadine turned partially before the bear reached her. The initial impact knocked her sideways to the ground. The bear delivered a single bite to the back of the neck with full force and then released. The animal stood briefly over her body, huffing and scanning the area. One woman on the trail deployed bear spray toward the animal. The spray cloud reached the bear within seconds. The bear recoiled sharply, turned, and ran back into the sagebrush before disappearing into the brush line. The physical contact had lasted less than 20 seconds. Nadine was alive when members of the group reached her. She had sustained a severe bite wound to the back of the neck, along with deep lacerations across the shoulder. Significant blood loss was visible on the ground beneath her. She was unconscious and breathing with difficulty. The group leader contacted emergency services, while others attempted to control the bleeding using clothing and available supplies from their pack. Park rangers were dispatched immediately after the call. Rangers arrived at the scene approximately 45 minutes later. A helicopter had been dispatched to the area, but Nadine's condition deteriorated rapidly before evacuation could occur. She was pronounced dead at the scene at 1:34 p.m. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death to be cervical spine trauma and associated vascular damage sustained during a grizzly bear attack. The bite to the posterior neck caused injuries that were not survivable regardless of medical response time. Investigators concluded the bear reacted defensively after Nadine closed the distance to roughly 30 yards through dense brush, eliminating the margin of warning typically present when bears detect humans at greater distances. Rangers also documented that Nadine had been instructed to hold position before stepping off the trail toward the animal. Only one member of the group had been carrying bear spray, which was deployed after the attack occurred. Nadine Okafor's fatal misjudgment wasn't the only tragedy Yellowstone would see. Weeks earlier, an experienced hiker from Germany would discover that even preparation cannot always prevent disaster on the trail. It was 27th August, 2014, and the trail toward the summit of Mount Washburn cut through subalpine meadows and thinning timber rising steadily toward long views that disappeared on storm days. That afternoon was clear and warm, with clouds building to the southwest that most hikers on the trail had already noticed and were timing their progress against. Robert Albrecht, 61, was a retired civil engineer from Dusseldorf, Germany, who had spent the better part of 3 decades hiking across 4 continents. He had summited peaks in the Alps, walked multi-week routes through Patagonia, and completed sections of long trails across New Zealand and Norway. His 2 travel companions, both longtime friends from a hiking club he had belonged to since his 40s, described him as methodical and fit, someone who moved efficiently on trail and paid close attention to conditions. He had researched Yellowstone thoroughly before the trip, read the wildlife guidelines, and purchased bear spray at an outfitter in Gardner the morning they arrived. He had been carrying it clipped to his hip strap for 2 days. The 3 of them had been hiking together all morning before Robert moved ahead of the others on the upper trail in order to reach the summit and begin the descent before the storm system arrived. Grizzly bears in Yellowstone's interior are most active in late summer, moving through subalpine habitat during hyperphagia, a period where bears eat aggressively to build fat reserves before winter. A grizzly in late August may consume up to 20,000 calories a day, ranging widely and feeding continuously. They are not looking for conflict, but they startle easily at close range, particularly on trails where bends and dense vegetation collapse sightlines to a few dozen feet. Park guidelines advise hikers to make noise on such sections to give bears the opportunity to move off before contact becomes unavoidable. Robert was roughly 50 yards ahead of his companions when he rounded a sharp bend in the trail. The upper section curved tightly through berry-heavy brush where sightlines collapsed around each turn, terrain where park guidelines advise hikers to call out or clap periodically to avoid surprising wildlife at close range. Robert came around the bend and found himself roughly 15 feet from a grizzly bear, feeding heavily on buffalo berry bushes growing thick along the edge of the trail. The bear's head came up immediately, a deep woofing exhalation, body stiffening, weight shifting forward. It dropped its head and came forward in a short bluff charge, stopping roughly 6 feet from Robert, huffing loudly and popping its jaws while holding its ground. Robert stopped. His hand moved toward the bear spray on his hip, but the safety tab was still in place. Rather than backing away slowly, he shifted sideways along the uphill edge of the trail, attempting to move past the bear. The movement triggered an immediate response. The bear charged at full speed and struck him before he had completed a second step. The initial impact drove Robert off the trail and into the brush. The bear bit into his upper back and shoulder, drove him to the ground, and mauled him for several seconds before his companions rounded the bend and came upon the scene. One of them discharged bear spray immediately, shouting and moving toward the bear. The cloud reached the animal within seconds. The bear recoiled violently, swinging its head and backing off the trail before crashing into the fir trees and disappearing. Robert was on the ground, conscious but unable to move, with severe injuries to his back, shoulder, and neck. His companions applied pressure to the wounds, and one ran back down the trail to find cell service, while the other stayed with him. The bear spray, still clipped to Robert's hip strap, safety tab intact, was noted by rangers when they arrived. Emergency responders reached the scene approximately 55 minutes after the call connected. Robert was responsive when the first ranger arrived, but his condition was deteriorating rapidly from blood loss and suspected spinal involvement. A life flight helicopter from southern Montana was dispatched and landed at a clearing near the lower trailhead. Paramedics worked to stabilize him in the field and continued treatment during the flight, but the injuries to his neck and upper spine were beyond what intervention could reverse. He was pronounced dead at the clinic at 8:47 p.m. that evening. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as traumatic spinal injury and acute hemorrhage sustained in a grizzly bear attack. The bear was not located for removal. Rangers later noted that the section of trail had limited sightlines due to dense buffalo berry growth, terrain where park guidelines strongly advise hikers to make noise when approaching blind bends. Robert Albrecht's decades of wilderness experience could not save him from a sudden bear encounter, but in Yellowstone, danger doesn't only wait on remote trails. It was June 3rd, 2015, and Lamar Valley was fully alive after a long winter. The meadows running deep green from snowmelt, elk moving in loose groups across the valley floor. The mornings cool and clear in the way that early summer mornings in Yellowstone are before the heat builds. Visitors who timed their trips for early June did so specifically for moments like this. The light generous, the wildlife visible and close. Angela Morris, 42, was a marketing manager from Chicago who had lost both of her parents within the same year, her mother in February, her father 7 months later in September. In the months that followed, she maintained a demanding work schedule filled with long hours, constant emails, and frequent client communication. Friends had been encouraging her for months to take time away somewhere quiet. She had booked the Yellowstone trip in March and driven the 11 hours from Chicago to Gardner alone, checking into a small lodge outside the park's north entrance the previous evening. That morning, she had sat in her parked car at the Lamar Valley turnout for several minutes before getting out, engine off, windows down, sitting quietly in the parked vehicle. She was still holding her phone when she spotted movement in the grass and stepped out of the car. Grizzly sows with cubs are among the most dangerous wildlife encounters in Yellowstone. A mother grizzly may charge immediately when she perceives a threat near her cubs, often without the extended warning displays seen in other bear encounters. Cubs frequently range ahead of or away from their mothers, while the sow feeds nearby, and the absence of a visible adult bear near a cub does not mean the sow is far away. Park guidelines set 100 yards as the minimum safe distance from bears for exactly this reason. In early June, when cubs are young and sows are alert and highly protective after months of denning, that distance carries more weight than at any other time of year. A small grizzly cub was moving through the grass 30 yards from the road, standing occasionally on its hind legs, sniffing the air, apparently alone. Angela watched from the turnout for several minutes before stepping off the road and into the meadow. The cub moved through the grass in an unsteady pattern, pausing frequently to investigate the ground with its nose. She took photographs from 30 yards, then moved closer, holding her phone out in front of her. The cub noticed her and stopped, watching briefly. Angela continued moving closer. She was within 15 yards when she held out her hand toward the animal. She did not notice that the cub had stopped looking at her. Its gaze had shifted to something behind her and above, past the low rise at the far edge of the meadow, where the ground crested and fell away. The cub made a soft vocalization, brief and high, and the meadow went quiet in the way that meadows go quiet when something has changed. A woman at the turnout behind Angela saw the ridgeline first and shouted. Angela began to turn. The sow crested the hill at a full run, already committed. She had seen a human standing yards from her cub, facing it directly. She covered the distance in under 3 seconds. Angela had barely completed her turn before the bear reached her. The strike knocked her off her feet, and the sow bit into her shoulder and upper back, drove her into the ground, and continued the attack for several seconds. Car horns erupted from the road, visitors shouting, someone yelling toward Angela to stay down. The sow pulled back, moved to her cub, and pushed it ahead of her toward the tree line. The entire encounter had lasted under 30 seconds. Angela was conscious when other visitors reached her and reported that she had lost sensation in her legs. Rangers arrived within 20 minutes and called for air evacuation immediately. A life flight helicopter from southern Montana landed in a field adjacent to the Valley Road, and paramedics worked to stabilize Angela before loading her. She was airlifted to a regional medical center in Idaho Falls, where she underwent emergency spinal surgery. The bite to the upper back had caused severe cervical and thoracic spinal cord damage that the surgical team was unable to reverse. She died on the operating table 4 hours after the attack. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as traumatic spinal injury sustained in a grizzly bear attack. Investigators noted Angela had left her vehicle, entered the meadow on foot, and closed to direct contact distance with a grizzly cub without bear spray and without awareness of the sow's proximity. The bear was not removed. Her friends arranged a memorial service in Chicago the following month. She had come to Yellowstone looking for something quiet and beautiful, a place to breathe again after a year that had taken everything from her. Angela Morris approached a bear cub without realizing its mother was nearby, but some Yellowstone tragedies begin long before the bear appears. It was the 27th of September, 2016, and the backcountry of Yellowstone National Park had quieted considerably after the summer crowds. The lodgepole forests held a particular stillness that time of year. Cool mornings, warm afternoons, the light coming through the trees at a lower angle each day. Daniel Harper, 34, had spent nearly 8 years as a software engineer at a growing tech company in Seattle. Long hours, a good salary, a life organized entirely around a job that disappeared overnight when the company downsized in the spring. The first weeks of unemployment had been disorienting. He sent resumes, heard little back, and found himself sitting in his apartment in a city that suddenly felt too loud for how quiet his days had become. He decided to go somewhere he had always meant to go, but never made time for. Yellowstone had been on that list for years. He He drove out from Seattle alone, arriving in Gardner on a Tuesday, and spent his first 2 days on the park's front roads before pulling a backcountry permit and heading into the interior on the third morning. People who knew him said the trip felt like the kind of decision a person makes when they are trying to remind themselves who they are outside of work. He had been hiking for 6 hours when he reached a small campsite at the edge of a meadow surrounded by lodgepole pines and sat down on a fallen log to rest. During the permit briefing, the ranger reminded him that all food and scented items had to be secured using the campsite's bear pole or bear-resistant storage box, and asked if he was carrying bear spray. Daniel said yes. The canister was clipped to the side pocket of his backpack. His pack contained the remains of a day's worth of trail food: jerky, 2 peanut butter energy bars, a packet of mixed nuts, and a half-eaten bag of dried mango. None of it in a hard-sided container, all of it sealed loosely in Ziploc bags inside the main compartment. He set the pack beside the log when he spotted a group of elk moving through the far edge of the meadow and reached for his camera. He would be gone only a few minutes. He left the pack where it was and walked out into the open grass toward the elk, the bear spray still clipped to the pocket of the pack he had just left behind. Food scent in warm air travels efficiently through forest. Jerky and peanut butter carry particularly strong odor profiles that bears in Yellowstone's backcountry have learned, through generations of exposure to careless campers, to associate with easy calories. A large male grizzly moving through the timber above the meadow caught the scent within minutes of Daniel leaving the site. It moved downhill through the trees without urgency, following the smell to its source, and found the backpack beside the log. It nosed the fabric, pawed at the main compartment, and tore through it with its claws in a matter of seconds. It was feeding when Daniel returned along the meadow trail 15 minutes later, glancing at the images on his camera screen. He stopped when he saw the shape beside the log. The bear lifted its head, and the two of them held still for several seconds, Daniel processing what he was seeing, the bear assessing whether the approaching figure was a threat to the food source it had claimed. Daniel took a step toward the pack. It was an instinctive movement, the kind a person makes before they have fully thought through what they are doing, and it was the wrong one. The bear came off the ground fast. No warning, no bluff. It covered the distance in under 2 seconds and hit Daniel at the chest and shoulder, driving him backward off his feet and into the base of a lodgepole pine. Daniel tried to roll away, and the bear bit into his upper back, shook him once, and bit again at the neck and shoulder. He got an arm up, and the bear took it, clamping down through the forearm and wrenching sideways. He stopped struggling. The bear held the bite for several seconds, then released, stood over him briefly, and returned to the pack. The forest was quiet again within minutes. The elk at the far edge of the meadow had long since gone. He never returned to the trailhead that evening. When Daniel failed to check out according to the itinerary listed on his backcountry permit, staff at the ranger station reviewed the permit log the following morning and initiated a welfare check along his registered route. A 2-person ranger team hiked toward the assigned campsite, calling out periodically and scanning the tree line as they approached. They found the campsite quiet. The backpack lay torn open beside the fallen log, its contents scattered across the ground. Clear signs of bear feeding activity were visible in the disturbed soil and damaged vegetation. Daniel's body was located several yards away at the edge of the trees. Additional rangers and a backcountry medical team were called to the site and confirmed death at the scene. Investigators documented the area, noting that food attractants had been left unsecured outside the campsite's designated bear storage system, that Daniel's bear spray had remained clipped to the abandoned pack rather than carried on his person, and that he had moved toward the bear after encountering it at the pack. A sequence of risk factors that significantly increased the likelihood of a defensive attack. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as traumatic injuries sustained during a grizzly bear attack. In the days that followed, wildlife staff monitored the area and recovered hair samples and track evidence consistent with a large adult male grizzly. The bear was later captured and fitted with a GPS collar as part of the park's ongoing wildlife management program. Daniel Harper's fatal mistake began with an unsecured backpack. Yet sometimes the danger isn't food left behind. It was the 4th of September, 2017, and the northern range of Yellowstone National Park had settled into the particular stillness of early fall. The summer crowds thinning. The grass is going gold along the ridge trails above Lamar Valley, the air carrying the first suggestion of cold that would deepen through the month. The valley below held the kind of light that photographers drive long distances to find. However, someone didn't know they wouldn't see the next day. Joe Callahan, 34, had spent 8 years as a staff writer at a regional newspaper in Bozeman before the company downsized, and his position was eliminated in the spring. Wildlife photography had been a hobby for most of his adult life. Weekends in the field, a decent camera body, several thousand images archived on hard drives he had never done much with. The job loss had pushed him towards something he might not have attempted otherwise. He was building a wildlife blog, pitching field experience stories to editors, trying to construct something from the wreckage of a career he had not chosen to leave. People who knew him described him as quietly determined, someone who processed difficulty by working rather than waiting. The Yellowstone trip was both research and reset, a chance to produce the kind of immersive, first-hand content that might distinguish his site from the dozens of others competing for the same shrinking pool of editorial attention. He had driven up from Bozeman alone and hiked out along the ridge trail above the valley shortly after dawn, camera bag over one shoulder, moving with the focused patience of someone who understood that good wildlife images required time and positioning. He had been on the trail for nearly 2 hours by the time he reached the ridge overlook. The morning had been productive by his standards. A coyote crossing the valley floor at first light, a bald eagle working the thermals above the tree line, a bull elk moving through the sage at the far edge of his range. None of it was extraordinary, but it was usable, the kind of quiet accumulation of images that built a body of work over time. He had stopped at the overlook to rest and review his shots, eating a protein bar and scanning the valley below with his lens, still hoping for something that would anchor the first post on his site. That was when he noticed the ravens. 5 or 6 birds lifting from the sagebrush and settling again in the same tight patch of ground roughly 100 yards below the trail. He watched them through his lens for several minutes. The pattern was consistent. The birds lifting and resettling in the same tight area, and to him it read as a predator kill, exactly the kind of discovery he had come to find. He left the trail and began moving downhill through the grass toward the birds, staying low, picking his way through the brush carefully, focusing on angles and light. As he closed the distance, the smell reached him, sharp, metallic. The heavy scent of fresh blood carried on the warming air. He paused briefly as the odor strengthened with each step. The ravens continued shifting around the same patch of ground. The birds lifted all at once, a sudden loud eruption of wings, and the hillside went quiet in the way that hillsides go quiet when something large has lifted its head. Joe took 2 more steps through the brush, trying to see what had startled them. He was 20 feet from the carcass when the grizzly came up from beside it. There was no warning sequence, no bluff charge, no assessment. A bear guarding a carcass at that distance has already made its decision. The bear covered the distance almost instantly and struck him before he could raise his arms. What followed lasted less than a minute. The bear bit into his neck and upper back, drove him to the ground, and mauled him with the focused, forceful efficiency of an animal eliminating a threat to its food. When it was satisfied, the threat was gone. It returned to the carcass. Joe did not move again. A pair of hikers on the ridge trail heard the ravens scatter, and then heard nothing, which was its own kind of sound. They scanned the slope below with binoculars and saw the bear at the carcass and a shape in the grass nearby that was not grass. They called 911 from the ridge at 9:14 a.m. Rangers closed the trail and approached cautiously after confirming the bear had moved off the carcass. They reached Joe 40 minutes after the call and found him unresponsive with catastrophic injuries to the neck and upper body. Emergency medical personnel arrived shortly after and confirmed death at the scene. No evacuation was initiated. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as traumatic injury sustained in a grizzly bear attack, with wounds to the cervical region incompatible with survival. Investigators noted he had approached an active scavenger congregation without bear spray and close to contact distance of a food-guarding grizzly. Rangers documented the carcass site, photographed tracks and disturbance patterns in the grass, and collected field notes describing the bear's defensive feeding behavior. Joe was buried in Bozeman 2 weeks later. He had never published a single post. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.